Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, June 12th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first story today, Trump picks new intelligence chief after revolt over Pulte. The president said he would nominate Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan and the former chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, for the permanent role. By Julian E. Barnes, Jonah E. Bromwich, Devlin Barrett, and Benjamin Weiser. President Trump said on Thursday that he would nominate Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, to be the next Director of National Intelligence, after the president faced a revolt from lawmakers over his choice for an interim director without any relevant experience. Mr. Trump had been under pressure to move on from his decision to appoint Bill Pulte, a top housing official, as the acting director, replacing Tulsi Gabbard, who announced last month that she would step down from the post. Mr. Pulte, who has used his current job to attack Mr. Trump's enemies, had come under withering criticism from Capitol Hill. Both Republicans and Democrats have argued he was unqualified to lead the nation's intelligence agencies. Mr. Trump, on a social media post, encouraged the Senate to confirm Mr. Clayton as soon as possible. Few people anywhere in the legal community are respected at the level of Jay, Mr. Trump wrote. Mr. Clayton, 59, was recommended for the post by John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, according to a person familiar with the conversation. The current plan is for Mr. Pulte to take over from Ms. Gabbard on June 19th and serve as the acting director until Mr. Clayton's nomination is reviewed by the Senate. Mr. Pulte, the person said, will seek to shrink the office beyond the cuts Ms. Gabbard had made. Mr. Trump wants Mr. Clayton to lead a smaller office, more narrowly focused on coordination among the 18 intelligence agencies. Senator John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, got no warning about the announcement, but spoke positively about Mr. Clayton's nomination. I think he's considered to be a very qualified professional with a great skill set for managing a complex problem set, Mr. Thune said. We will try to get him up and considered as soon as possible. The Senate Intelligence Committee scheduled a hearing with Mr. Clayton for June 17th, signaling a desire for Congress to move quickly to approve his nomination. Representative Jim Himes of Connecticut, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, praised Mr. Clayton and said he would make a terrific Director of National Intelligence. Senate Democrats may also support a speedy confirmation of Mr. Clayton, if only to push Mr. Pulte out of the acting role. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, said he needed a guarantee that Mr. Pulte would not serve as the acting director, a sentiment echoed by Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader. Pulte has to go, Mr. Schumer said. He cannot be in the DNI role. Our national security is too important. The appointment of Mr. Pulte derailed the congressional reauthorization of one of the government's most powerful surveillance authorities. But the announcement of Mr. Clayton, who is also a former chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, to be nominated for Senate confirmation seemed unlikely to immediately solve Mr. Trump's problems with reauthorizing the law. The House on Thursday rejected a 3-week extension of the law, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which will expire at midnight on Friday. With Congress now out of town and some lawmakers headed overseas, it would be difficult to schedule another vote before the deadline. In an administration stocked with officials seeking to win the president's favor, Mr. Clayton has kept a relatively low profile. But since taking over the most prominent federal prosecutor's office in the country in April 2025, he has frequently golfed and socialized with the president, including at Mar-a-Lago, Mr. Trump's estate and club in Florida. Mr. Clayton arrived at the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office at an unusual time for the proud institution, once nicknamed the Sovereign District in a nod to its independence from Justice Department headquarters in Washington. That independence was compromised almost immediately after Mr. Trump returned to the White House. He put Mr. Clayton in charge of the office months after his top Justice Department officials instructed its prosecutors to abandon a corruption case against the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams. That directive led to the resignations of a number of leading prosecutors, including the office's interim U.S. Attorney, Danielle R. Sassoon. Mr. Clayton had long expressed an ambition to lead the office, and some veteran prosecutors had hoped he would stabilize it. But instead, he has often been absent, and office alumni have been struck by his willingness to speak out publicly in support of the president. As U.S. Attorney, Mr. Clayton oversaw much of the document review related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. His prosecutors also brought a case against Nicolas Maduro, then the president of Venezuela, who was captured by American military forces in January. The office has brought several other prominent prosecutions. Last month, it charged the commander of an Iranian-backed militia with plotting to attack Jewish sites in the United States, including a synagogue in New York City. Mr. Clayton came under particular criticism in the legal community, including by Southern District alumni, after he refrained from commenting publicly when the Trump administration fired one of the senior prosecutors in his office, Maureen Comey, the daughter of James B. Comey, the former FBI director. But more recently, he did speak out to buttress Mr. Trump's concerns about voter fraud. This week, he appeared on CNBC's Squawk Box and raised concerns about the recent elections in California, after Mr. Trump suggested there had been fraud in the vote. Mr. Clayton told CNBC that the country was doing an absolutely terrible job on issues of election integrity, and the American people are right to question it. He also questioned California voting laws, including the lack of voter identification. "I'm not saying that there is fraud," Mr. Clayton said. "I am saying that the opportunity for fraud makes no sense to me when we can make a much better system." During her time as Director of National Intelligence, Ms. Gabbard won praise from Mr. Trump for her work on elections. She joined an FBI raid on voting records in Georgia. Still, Ms. Gabbard did much to dismantle the Foreign Malign Influence Center, which had been built up in the Biden administration to warn the public about election threats. Mr. Clayton will remain as the U.S. Attorney until he is confirmed for the Director of National Intelligence post, his spokesman Nicholas Biasi said late Thursday. If Mr. Clayton is confirmed, it is unclear who will succeed him on a temporary basis until a successor is confirmed. Much of the office's work was already being overseen by two veteran prosecutors, Amanda Houle, the chief of the office's criminal division, and Sean Buckley, the deputy U.S. attorney. House rejects bill to extend spy power, all but assuring a lapse. A measure to temporarily continue a key surveillance law failed in the House, and members left for a weekend-long recess, making an expiration all but inevitable. By Robert Jimison and Dustin Volz. Members of Congress departed Washington on Thursday without acting to extend one of the government's most powerful surveillance authorities for collecting information on foreign threats overseas, all but assuring that the law will expire as scheduled on Saturday. In a 218 to 198 vote, the House rejected a measure to temporarily renew a statute that underpins the government's cornerstone electronic spying program, known as Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Not long afterward, Democrats blocked a similar last-ditch effort in the Senate, underscoring the stalemate ahead of a Friday midnight deadline to extend it. A clutch of bipartisan lawmakers had until recently been negotiating some marginal changes to the law in a push to earn enough support for privacy advocates to renew the authority for 3 years. But the group splintered after President Trump said last week that he was installing Bill Pulte, a top housing official and a close ally who has no intelligence background, as acting director of national intelligence. Democrats, including those who had been pushing for the spy law's renewal, said they would not pass legislation extending it unless Mr. Trump backed down from his pick of Mr. Pulte or nominated a suitable permanent pick. Up until Thursday afternoon, the president had refused, despite Republican entreaties to do so or risk a lapse of a critical surveillance power. But hours after the extension bill failed in the House and lawmakers began leaving Washington for a week-long recess, Mr. Trump said he would nominate Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan and former chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, as his permanent pick for spy chief. It was not immediately clear whether Democrats would view Mr. Clayton more favorably than Mr. Pulte, and the announcement appeared to be too late to prevent the expiration of Section 702. Mr. Trump also did not withdraw Mr. Pulte as his choice for acting spy chief, a demand made by some top Democrats. The expiring authority permits the government to collect from U.S. technology companies like Google and AT&T the communications of foreigners located abroad without a warrant when seeking foreign intelligence information. Officials from multiple administrations have credited the program with helping identify terrorist plots, combat cyber attacks, and monitor the activities of foreign adversaries. Speaker Mike Johnson laid its imminent expiration at the feet of Democrats, calling their opposition to the temporary extension dangerous and very, very shameful, even though more than a dozen Republicans joined them in defeating the measure. They are willing to jeopardize the safety and security of the American people to make a cheap political point, Mr. Johnson said of Democrats. I pray that we do not have a serious calamity on our shores. But the law has long faced resistance from civil libertarians on both the left and the right, who are concerned that it allows the government too much latitude and tramples on privacy protections. Lawmakers in both parties have pushed for years, mostly without success, for stronger restrictions on how the FBI treats Americans' communications that are incidentally swept up in foreign intelligence collection. This year, however, the debate has been further complicated by the selection of Mr. Pulte. Democrats have argued that Mr. Pulte, who has used his perch as director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency to carry out a campaign of retribution on behalf of the president, would weaponize the nation's intelligence apparatus to do Mr. Trump's bidding. The president, who has long desired a spy chief who would comply with his desire to punish his perceived enemies, has already urged Mr. Pulte to conduct mass firings of employees at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The current spy chief, Tulsi Gabbard, has overseen significant downsizing at the agency. On Thursday, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, said that Mr. Trump's naming of Mr. Pulte had blown up a potential bipartisan compromise to reauthorize the law that had been on a glide path. There have been a half a dozen exit ramps for the White House on this problem, he told reporters. They have chosen not to take them. In the House, Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the minority leader, urged Democrats to oppose the temporary extension, saying it lacked necessary changes to the surveillance programs and expressing frustration over Mr. Pulte's appointment. There is a path to reauthorizing FISA, but it will require enacting meaningful reforms, Mr. Jeffries said before the vote in a statement issued with other Democratic leaders. We oppose this bill to kick the can further down the road. 19 Republicans and all but 7 Democrats voted against the stopgap measure. Hours later, Senate Democrats objected to bids by both Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas and the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the majority leader, to win quick approval of temporary extensions. The Senate is scheduled to return on Monday, while the House is planning to return on June 23rd. Should the Section 702 statute sunset, a built-in safety mechanism would most likely enable it to continue operating. The surveillance court that oversees FISA issued new annual certifications for the program in March, meaning the National Security Agency could continue to operate it until next spring, though such a scenario would invite legal challenges from the companies that the law requires to share communications data with the government. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Women who fled Iran are to be deported to Central African Republic, lawyers say. The women are among nearly 24 people slated to be sent to a country where the U.S. government has advised do not travel for any reason. By Megan Rajagopalan and Hamid Aliaziz. The Trump administration is preparing to deport nearly 24 people to the Central African Republic on Thursday, including at least 2 Iranian women who had sought refuge in the United States, according to lawyers and a government official. The flight, which is expected to include migrants from Afghanistan and Syria, would mark the first such deportation to the Central African Republic, a deeply impoverished country that has been plagued by conflict. The country is so dangerous that the U.S. State Department states on its website, "Do not travel for any reason." At least some of the migrants have received court orders in the United States prohibiting their deportation to their home countries because of the threat of persecution or torture, their lawyers said. Migrants face a higher burden of proof to win this withholding of removal status than they do to qualify for asylum. The Trump administration is working to find ways to deport people despite these court orders. The government is cutting deals with other countries willing to take them. The U.S. has sought or signed agreements with dozens of countries, including Ghana, Equatorial Guinea, and Eswatini. The Iranian women scheduled to be on Thursday's flight have no criminal record and have been granted court protection against deportation to Iran, said Sahar Jalili Poleski, one of their immigration lawyers. The precise circumstances of their cases were not immediately clear, but many Iranians who hold this protection fear persecution over their political beliefs or religious identity. The women were in serious disbelief when they realized they were rescheduled to be sent to the Central African Republic, said Ali Ramana of the Iranian American Legal Defense Fund, who recently met with them. The Department of Homeland Security said it would not confirm future deportations for security reasons. The planned deportations were confirmed by a U.S. official who spoke on condition of anonymity because the plans were not public. A senior immigration official in the Central African Republic said he had no knowledge of any final agreement. The migrants have no ties to the country, and it is unclear where they will live or whether they will ultimately be sent back to Iran. The U.S. government has documented significant human rights abuses in the Central African Republic, including unlawful killings, torture, and arbitrary arrest and detention. It's one of the hardest places in the world to live, and the idea that it would be considered a safe third country is absurd, said Anjali Parin, director of the Global Human Rights Clinic at the University of Chicago Law School. The existence of a deportation deal with the Central African Republic was reported earlier by Reuters. Ms. Parin, who has worked extensively in the country, said it has no functioning healthcare system and that fears of violence are constant despite a tentative peace agreement between armed groups and the state. Mr. Trump campaigned on a promise to curtail immigration, and the White House is looking to step up deportations to third countries as a way to make good on that pledge. The deportation of Iranians would be another example of that policy extending to groups that had previously been seen as U.S. allies or aligned with its values. The administration had been in talks with the Democratic Republic of Congo to deport more than 1,000 Afghans who had aided the U.S. war effort in their country, rather than allowing them to immigrate to the U.S. as planned. Negotiations stalled after a wave of public criticism, leaving the administration to seek new alternatives. Margaret Stock, an Alaska-based immigration attorney and a member of the legal team for an elderly Syrian man who was told he would be on the flight to the Central African Republic, said he has scars all over his body from being tortured in his home country. He feared returning to Syria because he is a Sufi Muslim, she said, and a U.S. immigration judge agreed that those fears were credible. The man, she added, suffers from diabetes, a grave risk in the Central African Republic where medical care, even for routine ailments, is extremely limited. He's not going to be able to access his medication, and he's going to die, Stock said, and they know he's going to die if they send him there. Ms. Stock said the man, who she said has no criminal record, had been released from immigration detention but was later taken into custody again at a traffic stop. Justice Department pushes limits of its power over state elections. The department once tried to stay out of state elections, urging caution. It is now pressing forward with claims of fraud as President Trump revives his unfounded assertions that elections cannot be trusted. By Devlin Barrett. Speaking to a conservative radio host on Monday, the top federal prosecutor in Los Angeles made an unusually pointed prediction that cast doubt on the results of California's primary races, even as votes were still being counted. "We will be charging some people," the prosecutor, Bill Essayli, told the host, Glenn Beck, delivering a promise that would most likely have been considered a violation of Justice Department policy under decades of past practice. "It will be election fraud charges in the next, I hate to put timelines on things, 1 or 2 months, I believe. We need some of these results to be certified so we can prove some of the allegations." The declaration, issued by an outspoken loyalist to President Trump, was a vivid example of the Justice Department's approach to voting under the Trump administration. The agency is seeking to assert more control over elections and challenge how states conduct them, a shift that could have significant consequences in the midterm elections this year, when control of Congress hangs in the balance. It is part of a broader effort by Mr. Trump to undermine confidence in the elections by repeatedly making baseless claims of voter fraud. The playbook dates to his first run for office in 2016, when he raised the specter of a rigged vote during his campaign and revisited the unfounded assertion even after he was declared the victor because Hillary Clinton had won the popular vote. In 2020, he revived the strategy, going so far as to try to overturn the results in swing states that had been won by Joseph R. Biden Jr. In the last year alone, the Justice Department has sought voter roll data from most states, sued those that have declined to comply, opened a criminal investigation into 2020 election results in Fulton County, Georgia, a state Mr. Trump narrowly lost that year, and demanded ballots from the 2024 race from Wayne County, Michigan. The administration is throwing everything against the wall that they can find and nothing is sticking, said David Becker, a former voting rights lawyer at the Justice Department, who is now the executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. Almost all of their work is going back over conspiracy theorists' allegations that were debunked 5 years ago, he added. They are running out of tools in their toolbox. California appears to be an early testing ground, as Mr. Trump and his allies stoke doubt about election outcomes they do not like, despite a lack of evidence of widespread fraud. According to Justice Department regulations, officials should not engage in overt criminal investigative measures in matters involving alleged ballot fraud unless the election in question has been concluded, its results certified, and all recounts and election contests concluded. The same section declares that the Justice Department should generally avoid interfering or appearing to interfere with election administration, tabulation, validation, or certification. Asked about Mr. Essayli's remarks, a Justice Department spokeswoman, Natalie Baldesarre, said that election integrity was a top administration priority and insisted that the department had legal authority to enforce election law, including by requesting state voter rolls. Investigations in California, she added, were in line with this authority and will continue despite the state's unwillingness to comply and reassure voters that their elections are in fact free, fair, and transparent. A spokesman for Mr. Essayli declined to comment. The administration has already effectively dismantled its public integrity section in Washington, which had for years included round-the-clock legal advisors in the week leading up to a general election. Its lawyers consulted with federal prosecutors and agents across the country about instances of possible election-related crimes, like ballot tampering or threats against candidates. Those lawyers tended to act as important checks on overly aggressive investigations that could be seen by the public as trying to affect the outcome of races. Most often, the public integrity lawyers would advise investigators to proceed cautiously and quietly rather than give more attention or importance to rumors or false accusations. But under Mr. Trump, that institutional check has disappeared, with local U.S. attorneys encouraged to more aggressively investigate, prosecute, and discuss their work on election fraud. Mr. Essayli has not only loudly announced his investigations, but he has also dispatched a prosecutor to the offices where ballots were being counted, and he has appealed for anyone with evidence of voter fraud to come forward, saying what we need right now are witnesses. Since taking over as the top prosecutor in Los Angeles, Mr. Essayli, a former state assemblyman, has proved willing to carry out Mr. Trump's agenda. He has dropped cases against the president's allies, aggressively pursued charges against protesters rallying against the administration's immigration crackdown only to face a string of losses, and investigated California over its policies toward transgender athletes. Mr. Essayli has criticized voting laws in the state as particularly vulnerable to fraud and manipulation, joining a chorus of Republicans who have assailed the process. California is particularly slow when counting ballots because of how many residents vote by mail. After holding an election on June 2nd, officials in the state were still counting votes this week, prompting GOP lawmakers to claim that the delay meant deceit. Some of these efforts are so diabolical and so far upstream it is impossible to prove, Speaker Mike Johnson said, but I think everybody knows instinctively something is wrong here. Dora Rose, the deputy director of the League of Women Voters of California, countered the claims of fraud that Mr. Trump and his allies were pushing. They don't have the facts, so they're manufacturing fear, and they're manufacturing chaos, Ms. Rose said. A slow count is not a sign that something is wrong. In fact, it's a sign that things are going the right way. States, not the federal government, do the bulk of the work involving elections, and election law experts said that the administration's efforts to portray California's voting as crooked were wrong and unfair because the amount of voter fraud discovered by the authorities is exceedingly rare. On social media, Mr. Essayli has tied his criminal investigations to a wide-ranging effort by the Trump administration to sue more than 25 states over their voter rolls, which includes the personal data of millions of Americans. California, he said, has stonewalled every effort to verify that only eligible U.S. citizens are registered to vote. He warned that his office would not look the other way. We will investigate and prosecute, he added. Every legal vote deserves to be counted. Every illegal vote cancels one out. In recent weeks, Justice Department leaders have ramped up their rhetoric about elections, particularly regarding Mr. Trump's loss in 2020. The acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said in an interview last month on Fox News that there was a ton of evidence that the election was rigged. Such evidence had existed for many years, he added, but the people responsible were very good at hiding up misconduct. Even though the White House has no formal or legal role in administering elections, Mr. Trump installed Kurt Olson, who tried to help overturn his election loss in 2020, to oversee election integrity and security. Mr. Olson has since moved to the Justice Department, working in a U.S. Attorney's office in Florida that is investigating what Trump supporters called a grand conspiracy against him. Despite the Trump administration's demands for voter roll data, at least 8 federal district judges have turned the administration away. Half of those judges were appointed by Mr. Trump. The administration is appealing the decisions. I don't know that the Department of Justice has ever had a 0-for-8 streak, Mr. Becker said, adding that Mr. Essayli's comments were likely to make it even harder for a judge to rule in the administration's favor. Under Mr. Trump, the Justice Department has struggled to retain personnel, rapidly losing thousands of career lawyers and installing ardent, less experienced loyalists in their place. While the president's unfounded claims of fraud were eroding trust in the election system, Mr. Becker added, the Trump administration's election investigations were having a similarly corrosive effect inside the department. They are running out of people, he said. When the only people you can hire are bad lawyers, you get bad cases litigated badly. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump, in latest pivot, retracts threat to strike Iran again and widen the war. Mr. Trump said that Iran was close to signing a peace deal. So far, weeks of talks have failed to produce an agreement. By Max Birak, Anuprita Das, Michael Levinson, and Jonathan Swan. President Trump began Thursday by threatening to bomb Iran for a third consecutive night and then seize Karg Island, Iran's main oil export hub in the Persian Gulf, an escalation that risked opening a deadly new chapter in the months-long war. Hours later, he abruptly reversed course. In a post on social media, he said he had called off the strikes planned for Thursday night based on the fact that discussions with the Islamic Republic of Iran have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved. At an event in the Oval Office on Thursday afternoon, Mr. Trump said the United States and Iran had agreed to a deal, subject to finalization of documents, and that it could be signed in Europe as soon as this weekend at a ceremony with Vice President J.D. Vance. It's a very strong memorandum of understanding that is a little conceptual, Mr. Trump said. But a spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry, Esmail Baghi, pushed back on Mr. Trump's assertion that both sides had reached an agreement. The claims which have been made regarding the agreement are speculative, and nothing has been finalized, Mr. Baghi said, according to Iran's state broadcaster. Mr. Trump's pivot was the latest in a dizzying pattern by the president, alternating between threats to escalate the war and claims that Iran is close to signing a peace deal. Shortly before he called off the strikes on Thursday, Mr. Trump spoke to Pakistani officials who have been mediating between Washington and Tehran. The Pakistanis told Mr. Trump that we have a deal with Iran, according to a senior administration official. Mr. Trump also spoke to his partner in the war, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, about the emerging memorandum of understanding with Iran to enter negotiations, Mr. Netanyahu's office said in a statement. Israel is not a party to the agreement, the statement said, but Mr. Netanyahu thanked Mr. Trump for promising that once a final deal is reached, it would compel Iran to give up its highly enriched uranium, dismantle its nuclear program, limit its missile production, and end its support of militias in the Middle East. Mr. Trump said that once the deal was signed, Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the critical oil shipping route, and the U.S. military would lift its blockade on ships entering and leaving Iranian ports. Mr. Trump added, "They will not have a nuclear weapon. They have agreed to that." It was not clear, however, if Iran had agreed to any changes in its nuclear program. So far, multiple rounds of talks over the past 2 months have failed to produce an agreement to end the war, restrain Iran's nuclear program, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And Mr. Trump did not offer any details to support his claims of a breakthrough. Before Mr. Trump retracted his latest threat to attack Iran, Iranian and American forces had exchanged attacks on 2 consecutive nights this week, raising fears around the region that the fighting in the Middle East might become impossible to contain. After striking Iran on Tuesday night in retaliation for the downing of an Army Apache helicopter, Mr. Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth approved another round of attacks on Wednesday night that they said was meant to pressure Tehran to agree to peace on the president's terms. As Mr. Hegseth put it, "If we need to negotiate with bombs, we'll negotiate with bombs." Ricardo Alcaro, an Iran expert at the Institute of International Affairs in Rome, said that Iran was unlikely to ratchet back its strikes on U.S. bases in the region as long as it is under attack. If the Iranians perceive this military power is to force them to accept concessions they are unwilling to accept, they are much more likely to respond by escalating than by giving in, he said. The fighting has unfolded against the backdrop of an April ceasefire that was meant to usher in talks to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and permanently end the conflict. But Iran's foreign ministry said on Thursday that the U.S. strikes this week had rendered that ceasefire, which had already failed to stop repeated attacks by both sides, meaningless. Mr. Trump has at times seemed wary about escalating a war that is unpopular with Americans, according to polls. But he started Thursday with a social media post declaring that the United States would hit Iran very hard tonight and then turn its sights to a more ambitious goal. At some point in the not-too-distant future, we will be taking Kharg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela, he wrote. In an interview on Fox and Friends on Thursday morning, Mr. Trump sounded more ambivalent about taking the island. "I don't know that America has the stomach for it, to be honest with you," he told the show's hosts. "You know, you'd make a fortune, but I don't know that America has the stomach. I think they'd like to see us come home." And then hours after that, he had changed his tone entirely. Storming the island would be difficult, analysts said, and could expose American ground troops to attacks. A coral outcrop in the northern reaches of the Persian Gulf, Kharg Island sits roughly 15 miles off the Iranian coast. Before the war, about 90% of the country's crude oil exports transited through the island, which is surrounded by water deep enough to allow large oil tankers to dock. Iran is believed to have bolstered its defenses on the island, including moving more military personnel there this year. After Mr. Trump issued his threat to take the island on Thursday, Iran's lead negotiator in Washington, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, warned the United States on social media that impulsive decisions will reset the entire board for the worse, explode energy infrastructure and markets, and create an endless quagmire that you will be stuck in for years. Because Kharg Island is some 400 miles away from the Strait of Hormuz, even U.S. dominance of the island would do little to stop Iran from controlling the flow of commercial ships in the waterway. It could also cause oil prices, which are up about 30% since the start of the war, to soar even further, especially if Iran retaliated by attacking oil infrastructure in the Persian Gulf. World Bank warns Iran war is slowing global growth. The world economy is weakening as energy prices fuel a new bout of inflation, by Alan Rappaport. The war in the Middle East is slowing global economic growth this year to its weakest pace since the COVID-19 pandemic, according to a World Bank report published on Thursday that revealed the fallout of soaring energy prices. The U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran in late February has led to a prolonged disruption of cargo traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, causing oil, gas, and fertilizer prices to gyrate for months. The disruption to global supply chains has fanned a new round of inflation, raising expectations for higher interest rates and slower output around the world. The World Bank lowered its growth outlook from earlier this year, projecting output to slow to 2.8% in 2026, from the 2.9% it grew in 2025. It estimated that output could fall to 1.3% if the conflict escalated and supply disruptions were protracted. The conflict appeared to be escalating on Thursday when President Trump threatened additional attacks on Iran and a takeover of its energy infrastructure. At some point in the not-too-distant future, we will be taking Kharg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela, Mr. Trump wrote in a post on social media. Uncertainty over the arc of the war is expected to persist, as Mr. Trump said later on Thursday that he was canceling the strikes on Iran while negotiations continued. After more than 4 years of persistent inflation, the war is pushing prices higher again. The World Bank projects that global inflation will rise to 4% in 2026, from 3.3% last year. The increase is being driven by a 22% rise in commodity prices, which in January had been expected to decline. Rising prices in the Eurozone pushed the European Central Bank to raise interest rates on Thursday, making it the first global central bank to increase borrowing costs in the wake of the war. The inflation rate in the Eurozone was 3.2% in May, driven by higher energy prices stemming from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The Middle East is bearing the brunt of the global slowdown as the war impedes oil exports. Europe is also facing substantial headwinds because of its reliance on natural gas imports. High food prices and fertilizer shortages are slowing growth in sub-Saharan Africa. The U.S. economy has been relatively resilient because of tax cuts, artificial intelligence investments, and domestic oil production. Despite those buffers, the United States is also contending with rising consumer prices. On Wednesday, the Consumer Price Index showed that the annual rate of inflation rose to 4.2% in May. That was up from 2.4% before the war in the Middle East started, and the fastest pace since April 2023. The World Bank said policymakers needed to balance their goals of containing inflation and supporting economic growth. It warned that weaker investment could lead to slower hiring. The conflict has taken a toll on global activity, but every crisis also brings an opportunity, said Ian Coase, Deputy Chief Economist at the World Bank Group. This moment should be used to strengthen policy frameworks, invest in infrastructure, accelerate business-enabling reforms, and mobilize private capital to support job creation at scale. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. UK Defence Secretary resigns in a blow to Starmer. John Healey unexpectedly announced that he was stepping down, saying Prime Minister Keir Starmer was failing to invest enough money in the British military. By Michael D. Shear. John Healey, Britain's defense secretary, resigned on Thursday, accusing Prime Minister Keir Starmer of failing to invest enough money in its military and leaving the country well short of what it needed to protect itself in a dangerous world. Mr. Healey, who has been one of the Prime Minister's staunch allies, said he was informed on Monday that Mr. Starmer intended to announce a plan that would not increase military funding as much as Mr. Healey believes is necessary. I am being forced to make decisions that would reduce the readiness of our forces and increase the risk to personnel on operations and could make the country less safe, Mr. Healey wrote in a letter to the Prime Minister that he posted on social media. The unexpected resignation is a significant blow to Mr. Starmer, who is likely to face a challenge to his leadership of the Labour Party later this summer. Mr. Healey's clear lack of confidence in the Prime Minister bolsters the case of his critics, who insist the party needs a change at the top. Mr. Healey said that Mr. Starmer's defense investment plan would increase military spending to 2.68% of gross domestic product by 2030, short of the 3% that Mr. Healey and Mr. Starmer had discussed in the past. After explaining to you that I would not be able to accept a DIP settlement that does not give our forces the resources they need, Mr. Healey wrote, I am now left with no other option than to submit my resignation as your defense secretary. Mr. Starmer's office released a letter from the Prime Minister to Mr. Healey Thursday evening. In it, Mr. Starmer defended his investments in the country's military and said the choices he makes to pay for it will be sustainable and fair. They will mean significant reallocations of funding from across government departments and the right choices to protect our nation, Mr. Starmer wrote to Mr. Healey. Strong public finances are part of what keeps us safe. Irresponsible borrowing only puts that at risk. Questions about how much Britain plans to invest in the military have swirled through the government for months, as Mr. Starmer delayed releasing a long-term defense plan. A year ago, Mr. Starmer's government published a strategic defense review, which called for a significant improvement to military readiness, including the addition of British-built long-range weapons, the creation of a cyber command, and the development of drones and new ways to protect undersea cables. In a speech at a British defense company last week, the Prime Minister warned of the dangers that Britain and Europe face. It is our intelligence assessment and the assessment of other countries in NATO that there could be an attack by Russia on NATO as soon as 2030, he said. Mr. Healey took note of those comments in his resignation letter, saying they were evidence that you know what defense needs. There has also been immense pressure from President Trump, who has repeatedly accused Britain and European nations of failing to spend enough on defense. Mr. Trump has mocked the British Navy as being too old, with aircraft carriers that didn't work. But the sluggish economy in Britain has made it challenging for Mr. Starmer to find the money for a big lift in military spending without making politically unpopular decisions, such as tax increases, cuts in other domestic programs, or large-scale borrowing. Each of those options comes with steep downsides. Tax increases would be highly contentious in a country where levies on the population are already relatively high. Many people in Britain remember with anger the steep cuts to popular services, known as austerity, put in place by previous Conservative Party-led governments, and financial markets would likely respond poorly to more government borrowing. Mr. Starmer has come under pressure from the left flank of his party to invest more in the National Health Service, infrastructure, transport, and other domestic programs that suffered years of capital underinvestment before Labour took power. That has been part of the argument made by Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, who is running for a seat in Parliament so he can try to replace Mr. Starmer as Prime Minister. In his letter to Mr. Healey, the Prime Minister said he had already increased the defense budget after it was hollowed out by previous Conservative Party governments. He promised to go further in the plan he will release soon, but did not offer details in the letter. It will make the big strategic investments we need for the long term and give the certainty which private finance needs to invest, he wrote. It will allow our armed forces to transform and modernize and back them with tools they need to change the way we fight and to deter our enemies. In his own letter, Mr. Healey appeared to lay much of the blame for lower military spending on Rachel Reeves, Britain's top finance official, who oversees the Treasury. He told Mr. Starmer that he had initially been hopeful that there was agreement on the need to boost the country's military. Since then, you have been unable, and the Treasury has been unwilling, to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country at this time of rising threats, he wrote. Ms. Reeves said this week that tax increases would be better than borrowing to pay for defense. Aides to Mr. Starmer have declined to say whether he agreed with her. Government officials refused to say, as recently as Wednesday afternoon, what Mr. Starmer has decided to do. A spokesman told reporters on Wednesday that the investment plan would be unveiled before a NATO meeting at the beginning of July. In Parliament on Wednesday, Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party, accused Mr. Starmer of delaying because of concerns about how to pay for the defense investments. Projects have been put on hold, and Britain is getting weaker with every passing day, she said. At a time of increased global instability and tension, with war in Europe and the Middle East, the Prime Minister is paralyzed, giving the armed forces less than half of the minimum that they need. Mr. Starmer responded by noting that military spending had fallen during the 14 years that Ms. Badenoch's party was in power. He noted that his government had already agreed to increase it to 2.6% from 2.3% by 2027. We have carried out a strategic review of defense, and we are committed to publishing the Defense Investment Plan before the NATO summit, he said. Tony Travers, a professor of politics at the London School of Economics, said that Mr. Healey's resignation carried weight in Britain because he was not regarded as a ruthlessly ambitious politician or someone prone to rash decisions. A lifelong Labour politician, Mr. Healey has served in Parliament for decades, serving every Labour Prime Minister since Tony Blair, starting in 2001. He's a sort of rational moderate, almost the ultimate exemplar of a rational politician, Mr. Travers said. He's definitely not somebody who is prone to sudden and unexpected career moves, and so this suggests he was very, very disgruntled. AI chatbot helps a $100 thrift store painting sell for over $250,000. When his son got curious about the origins of a painting his mother bought at a second-hand shop decades ago, Google Gemini had some intriguing thoughts. By Malia Mendez. 60 years ago, Helena Plotkin was perusing a thrift store in White Plains, New York, when a painting, nestled among several others, caught her eye. Plotkin, who has an undergraduate degree in art, found herself mesmerized by the artwork's bursts of color and its bold brushwork, which evoked the Fauvist style she loved. In the painting, a woman dressed in black sits in a domestic setting dashed with bright blue and orange hues. Plotkin remembers paying less than $100 for it. The painting hung on Plotkin's wall until last December, when, with the help of artificial intelligence, she discovered that her decades-ago thrift find was in fact a relic of European art history. Later verified by art appraisers as an original work by the acclaimed Scottish colorist F.C.B. Cadell, Plotkin's painting sold to a private buyer at auction this month for £189,200 with fees, or roughly $254,000. Stories of family heirlooms that turn out to be worth fortunes have long been fodder for television shows like Antiques Roadshow and Pawn Stars. Yet Plotkin's path to profit suggests that AI may be able to provide the rank and file with a kind of object identification services historically limited to the expertly trained human eye. Plotkin, 88, had long sensed a regal feeling in Cadell's portrait, imagining its subject as, say, a politician's wife. The woman has always reminded Plotkin of Eleanor Roosevelt. But she never suspected that she owned a masterpiece worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I never thought about it at all," Plotkin said in a recent telephone interview, "other than I loved the painting." Plotkin's son Barry, 60, recalled that throughout the years, even as his mother occasionally speculated about the artwork's origins, her curiosity never went beyond passing remarks, nor did he feel the painting warranted an investigation. It would have been a hassle to transport it to an auction house just to be turned away. Then, a few months ago, a thought struck Barry during a visit to his mother's home in Florida. Why not try Gemini, Google's AI assistant? He snapped a photo, uploaded it, and asked the chatbot what it could tell him about the painting. "It was amazing how much information came out of that," he said. In some of Gemini's early responses, it noted the painting's orange accents, its Art Deco aesthetics, and its lilac backdrop, all unmistakably characteristics of Cadell's work. It also cited the painter's affiliation with the Scottish colorists, a group of 4 artists, Cadell, John Duncan Ferguson, George Leslie Hunter, and Samuel John Peploe, who infused modern British art with Fauvist and French Impressionist flavors. "Your mother didn't just find a Cadell," Gemini wrote. She found a large-scale 1920s studio portrait of his primary muse, painted in his most famous Edinburgh studio. On top of delivering that great news, Gemini directed Barry to consult the back of the painting. Here, he and his mother found an auction marking, a canvas stamp, and a processing date. Gemini recommended next steps for verification, including contacting an auction house and a professional art appraiser. The AI assistant suggested the specialists Nick Curnow and Alice Strang at Lyon & Turnbull in Edinburgh. As the story unraveled, we just got more and more excited, Strang said in an interview, because this is the stuff of auctioneers' dreams. Strang and Curnow confirmed much of what AI had maintained, with a key exception. Gemini had identified Cadell's subject as Bethia Hamilton Don Wauchop, a frequent model of Cadell's whose name is inscribed on the back of the work, but Lyon & Turnbull pinpointed the model as May Easter, another of the painter's models. The turban that Easter wears in Plotkin's painting she also wears in Cadell's Pink and Gold. Both paintings were most likely made in the mid-1920s, Strang said. Additional research and technical analysis, including inspection under 3 kinds of light, further confirmed Gemini's findings. Cadell was an absolute master of the paintbrush, Strang said, adding, "He says I am Cadell over and over in these paintings." Strang said she could not explain how Cadell's painting wound up in suburban New York in 1966, mere months after Christie's in London had sold it for £21, or some $600 today. Mirroring Cadell's naming style, she and Curnow titled the painting Interior, The Lady in Black. Strang could have attributed the painting to Cadell on her own, she said, though she acknowledged that without AI's assistance, Plotkin's son might never have come to the firm. As for the hefty payout, Plotkin, who has taught art and been known to give away her own paintings, said she planned to let her sons have it. "I don't want any," she said, "it's theirs." Her one hope is that the artwork's buyer might occasionally display it publicly. She imagined her grandchildren might come across it and say, "Oh, look, there's Nana's painting." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, June 12th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.